Hello, my name is Jacqueline Pollauf, and today I wanted to share an overview to the harp part from Maurice Duruflé's Requiem. Duruflé was a French organist and composer. He wrote some works for solo organ, a couple of piano pieces, and a few choral pieces, among others. However, this Requiem was considered to be his masterpiece. It's 9 movements in length, and performance lengths vary anywhere from 38 to around 50 minutes. Duruflé was really inspired by Gregorian plain chant in writing this work, and so it has this really flowing and kind of free feel to it. It's very beautiful and mesmerizing for the listener, but there are some challenges to that feel for the performer. Duruflé uses a lot of meter changes throughout the work, and he really obscures a lot of the downbeats, and sometimes phrases are very free-flowing, so there can definitely be some challenges with all of that. Actually, Duruflé wrote 3 different versions of this Requiem, which he published between 1948 and 1961. All 3 versions are for soloists and chorus, but the accompanying instruments differ. So one version uses solo organ for accompaniment, and obviously there's no harp included in that. Then there's a version with a full orchestra accompaniment, which does include harp. And the final version is for what Duruflé called reduced orchestra, like a chamber orchestra, and this also includes the harp. The harp part for the full orchestra and reduced orchestra versions is quite similar. However, in movement 3, in the reduced orchestra version, the harp has a small part, whereas in the full orchestra version, the harp does not play at all in movement 3. And then the final movement, movement 9, the harp plays differing things between the versions. What I wanted to do today is to go movement by movement and discuss the harp part and demonstrate some relevant passages. In doing this, I'll go over any general differences between the 2 versions for that movement. Duruflé was very detail-oriented, so there are some minor differences as well. There are things like a passage that he might mark forte in one version, but fortissimo in the other version, and since these are so small, I won't discuss these. Overall, I think this harp part is quite well written. There are no big technical challenges to it, although there are a couple of awkward passages, but it's generally very satisfying to play. And in my recent publication, Choral Repertoire, Harp Parts, I have included full parts for both versions of this work. And at the end of the video, I'll talk a little bit more about that and explain some of the harp-specific notation that I added. The harp part for movement 1 is quite straightforward. The harp comes in and just plays the last 20 bars or so of the movements with a single line of straight 8th notes. In the full orchestra version, these 8th notes are all kind of surrounding middle C, and in the reduced orchestra version, the harp is playing the same pitches and same rhythms, but just playing down an octave with harmonics. So obviously it's the same notes, but just a little bit more of a delicate effect to it. I'll go ahead and play a few bars of each version to show this. There is nothing terribly challenging or unusual about this movement. The tempo is quite comfortable, and the harp is musically in a supporting role within the ensemble. As with the entire piece, it is important to keep track of the many meter or time signature changes. We start in 3/4 and then move on to 4/4 and then into 9/8, where the 8th note stays the same, and into 2/4 and so forth. For both versions, the harp is tacit for movement 2. As I mentioned earlier, for movement 3, in the full orchestra version, the harp is tacit, but in the reduced orchestra version, the harp has a small part. This just consists of a few chords scattered throughout the movement. I'll go ahead and play a few bars of this to demonstrate. The harp is not exposed in this movement, but is just adding to the general sound by playing in rhythmic unison with other instruments. Where the harp enters, the first three measures are slightly tricky since both hands are jumping between chords at the pace of an eighth note, so a little bit quick. And this might be a spot to just drill slowly or perhaps to memorize a little bit so that you can look at your hands as you're jumping. In movement 4, the harp part is the same for both versions. The harp is playing various passages scattered throughout the movement, and it starts with a couple of really straightforward chords, and then there's a passage of sextuplet arpeggios. I'll go ahead and play a couple bars of this. There are many different ways to divide this passage up between the hands. You could put 2 fingers in each hand. You could do 1 finger in the left, 3 in the right. Or you could do the opposite of that, 3 in the left, 1 in the right. Or you could do 3 fingers coming up with the left hand and then 3 going back down with the right hand. However you decide to divide it up, I think it's just important to make a decision and be consistent about that. And since it does move fairly quickly, practicing this with altered rhythms like a long-short or a short-long can be helpful to smooth this out. After this passage, we have a tricky passage with jumping chords in both hands. I'll go ahead and play a little bit of this now. This passage is one of the most technically challenging in the whole work, and it's tricky for a few different reasons. For one thing, both hands are jumping, which is always more work than the hands trading off, and there's a big variety of intervals and chord voicings that Duruflé is using here, but they never match between the hands, so there's a lot to keep track of there. And then this passage is straight eighth notes for 8 measures, so there's no chance to kind of regroup or catch your breath within that. Also, the tempo is a bit faster than is comfortable for what Duruflé wrote. So certainly this is a spot to spend some time on in practicing. And you could start with the hands separately or start with both hands really slowly and gradually increase the tempo. Another idea is to try it with a long-short or a short-long altered rhythm to change the emphasis. Or perhaps to start at the end and learn the final measure first and then back up and do the last 2 measures and the last 3 measures and so forth. Another thing to keep in mind overall is that if the conductor is taking really a crisp tempo, this might be a spot to edit a little bit based on your personal preference. So perhaps dropping the occasional note within a 4-note chord can make this a lot easier. Or even playing the right hand as written, but with the left hand just playing quarter notes rather than eighth notes. So playing essentially every other group for what Duruflé wrote, that definitely makes it a lot easier. For both versions, the harp is tacit for movement 5. In movement 6, both versions have almost the same part with just a couple of very slight differences. And this movement is the most exposed overall for the harp. Throughout much of the movement, the harp is playing straight 16th notes. And a lot of the time, that's just a single line, so you can trade off between the hands. But in the middle, there's a few measures where both hands are playing at the same time. I'll go ahead and play a bit from the beginning of this movement and the middle of this movement to give you an idea of this harp part. The harp is particularly exposed at the beginning and end of this movement and has a similar passage in both places. This movement isn't really technically challenging, but it can feel slightly awkward to play. I think that's because Duruflé uses a variety of intervals here, and sometimes it's just surprising where he chooses to go next. There are many different ways to distribute this between the hands, so it's important to figure out what works well for you and to be clear in marking that in your music and consistent with that in practicing. Also, at the beginning, since the harp is in a fairly low register, it can be difficult to keep everything really nice and clean. So placing quite late and trying to place really strategically is helpful with that. In movement 7, the harp plays 5 single notes at the end of the movement. In the reduced orchestra version, all 5 are just individual harmonics, and in the full orchestra version, a couple are harmonics and a couple are regular notes. So obviously this is very simple and I'm not going to demonstrate it, but this is one of my favorite movements compositionally. When we come to the end there, it is just such a satisfying and beautiful musical moment. For movement 8, both versions have a very similar part with chords scattered throughout the movement. There are just a few small differences between these versions in the exact voicings of chords used, and there are also a couple of quarter notes that become eighth notes between the versions. I'll go ahead and play a bit of the opening passage and then a bit of the ending passage to show the chord writing here. The chordal writing here is quite similar to movement 4, but a bit less challenging. In many of the measures, the hands can just trade off between the chords, so that's really helpful. And in others, where the right hand has a constant pattern of eighth notes, the left hand part is a bit more sparse, so that makes the entire thing less demanding than movement 4. However, there are some tempo changes to this movement. In the first passage where the harp plays, we have an animando and then a molto animando. And as the tempo really is pushed throughout that, sometimes it might be useful to drop a note here or there within the chords to keep up with the ensemble. For movement 9, the final movement of this work, the two versions have different harp parts that are not related to each other, so I will talk about them separately. For the full orchestra version, the harp is playing a bit of a counter melody in harmonics, kind of moving around the harp, and then it has some low octaves to support toward the end of the movement. I'll play a bit of each of those as a demonstration. Overall, this movement has an ethereal and delicate feel to it, and the harp harmonics fit in really well with that. In practicing those, it's important to consider whether the string being played is in the flat or natural position, the two positions used here, and therefore whether the hand needs to slide up a little bit higher to find the center for the flat position or come down slightly into the natural position. Another thing to think about with the harmonics is perhaps as the line comes up the harp, there might be a point where you might be more comfortable playing some of the harmonics with the right hand rather than the left hand. The octaves are not very difficult to play, but I do like to use a flat hand to keep everything really clean there. For the reduced orchestra version, the harp is playing what the celeste originally played in the full orchestra version. So this also begins with harmonics, but they are different pitches and different rhythms and placed in different measures. And actually these harmonics are all two harmonics simultaneously. And then toward the end, we go back to some low octaves and end with another couple of harmonics. So I'll play some little bits from this. So with these double harmonics, some people like to play them all in one hand and other people like to split them between the hands, which is really just a matter of personal preference. At the end of the piece, they're no longer just a second apart, but they've become a fourth apart and then a third. So at that point, especially with the fourth, I think many people like to use both hands to play them for the larger interval. And these harmonics do complete the entire work. It's a lovely way for this Requiem to end. As I mentioned earlier, my publication, Choral Repertoire Harp Parts, includes Duruflé's Requiem, and I have the complete part for both the full orchestra version and the reduced orchestra version within this book. I wanted to show a little bit of my edition and explain how I put this together. So here we have the fourth movement, the Sanctus, and in making my editions, I did not alter anything that Duruflé wrote or simplify them in any way, but I re-notated everything to make it really clear and easy to read using modern notation. And then also you can see that I've added quite a bit of information specifically for the harpist. So at the beginning here we have an opening pedal chart, and then there are pedal markings shown throughout the movement. Also, there are some cues within this movement. So here we have the soprano cues leading into the first harp entrance and then again to this one over here. And then there's some additional information, including when some various vocal groups enter. So the altos enter here, sopranos enter here. And then also with this passage of sextuplets, I have a suggested fingering and hand distribution included. So throughout the parts, there is all kinds of additional harp information like this to make the parts as friendly and easy to use as possible for the harpist. In addition to the Duruflé, this book includes complete harp parts for 6 other choral pieces, and I'll go ahead and put some links to it below in the description. It is available both as a hard copy and as a PDF. I hope this video has given you a helpful overview to the harp part of both the full orchestra and reduced orchestra versions of Duruflé's Requiem. I find it to be a beautiful and meditative piece that I think suits the harp really well, so I hope you enjoy learning and performing it.